Hey, what's up? What's up? Yeah, I'm learning how to edit videos, so I'm gonna try to cut this one up a little bit and edit pieces, so it'll be a little bit different than the previous ones where it was just me talking straight up the whole time. But yeah, I'm gonna start with the Obi Toppin, and Toppin is one of the big time prospects in this class. 6'9", I think maybe a 7 foot wingspan. Um, that would add up to about 8'11", I would estimate standing reach. Doesn't have a very long neck and kind of his head, the way it's shaped, like his neck kind of points out as opposed to up. So I think he has a pretty good standing reach relative to his wingspan and height. He's decently large shoulders, but not like huge. Um, Obviously, the big thing with him is he's like a big time leaper and finisher above the rim. Really, really productive scorer in the NCAA. Obviously, like guys like John Collins and Brandon Clark will come up as comparisons among recent players that are just these incredible finishers at the rim. Really reliable. If you like pass him the ball and give him a drop off at the dunker spot, it's more than likely, gonna end up a basket. And I think that is important. I think it's a little bit like on-ball defense, where it's not a skill I place a huge amount of value in, but when you are an elite level finisher, that is useful and reliable. And yeah, he's a great lob target. Catch radius is really, really impressive. He has the catch radius of like a bouncy 7 foot guy, despite being, as I mentioned, 6'9", with maybe an 8'11" or so standing reach. Potential dunk contest winner in the future. Blake Griffin is another guy that I think there might be some comparisons for Toppin of. Um, Pretty good touch as well. I think a lot of the finishing, to be fair, is probably a product of Dayton's system. They really set up a lot of easy finishes for their bigs, and the way their spacing is, how well they execute. Anthony Grant really has done a great job with that program and that team. This particular collection of guys that they have right now, especially, but. Yeah, just generally, Grant, the offensive principles they have and stuff like that have been very effective, and really allowed their big men to consistently be among the top most efficient finishers at the college level. 83 effective field goal percentage on pick and roll rolls to the rim and putbacks, 93 attempts. Really quick off his feet and gets really high. And that kind of brings the vertical gravity, which I think is kind of a big part of who he is as prospect. My forehead like looks shiny here. I'm not sweating, but yeah, whatever. Sorry, this webcam not the greatest quality. But he's not like incredible making super high level reads on the move or anything like that, but will make some pretty solid passes. I think that's kind of one of the things that separates him maybe from other similar just athletic finishers. When he's like at a standstill, or if he really has the defense collapsed or aggressively double teams, he knows when to use the bounce pass, when to lob up a pass to a fellow big man, when to use a bullet pass, understands the angles fairly well. His timing could use some work, but decent enough. Also, pretty unselfish, and the capability out of just creating out of the short roll for teammates. Playing 4-on-3 is certainly there, and also 66 effective field goal percentage, also 93 spot up attempts in his 2 years at Dayton. Not a huge sample there, but pretty reliable, um, relative to some of the other guys within his kind of archetype, like a Reggie Perry, who I'll talk about a little bit later on. Um, Free throw percentage is decent in the around 70-71%. Pull-up shooting numbers aren't great, but promising enough. Certainly further along than Brandon Clark was a year and a half ago, or I think would be a fairly similar stage to John Collins. It's important to note that him and Collins are almost the same age right now. Toppin's birthday is in February of '98, and Collins is September of '97. So, that's a 5 months difference. I think there's a little bit of a difference where you could kind of favor Toppin from the perspective of experience and the fact that he's had a growth spurt a few years back, and He's had kind of this fairly what's the word uh, sudden steep development curve. He's consistently improved a lot every season since he's been at Dayton, and even going back to high school, reading about him, he seems to have made some pretty uh, uh, aggressive strides forward in his development as a overall basketball player. But I think how would you guys compare him and John Collins? Let me know what you think. Just as far as shooting, not overall, but I mean just as far as shooting. I think Collins is probably a little bit better, but maybe they're about similar overall. And when you think about again the experience and Toppin's recent history and stuff, I think it's fair to say that he'd be at least at a similar level to Collins as a shooter. Um, Projecting going forward. Shot mechanics are solid. Single motion, shoots it kind of from the middle of his body, kind of a weird elbow angle. A lot of dependence on his wrists, but a little bit too flicky for my tastes. And you'll see a lot of rainbows out of him while you just kind of throw it up, especially off the dribble. But quick release, which makes it more difficult to contest. But also kind of limited for upside because of that kind of atypical and strange way of shooting. I think high thirties with high volume and like efficient pull up and movement shooting is probably out of his range as a jump shooter. But overall, fairly trustworthy shooting. And I think another thing I'll add is what really made me rise on Toppin recently, as I've done film work for this, and even prior to that, I've been watching more Toppin since the end of the season. I think it's just realizing how fast he is in the open floor and like in the straight line. Like he really, really could cover ground and kind of get up court and down court really really fast in like space and the straight line. He's really really fast. It's not just the leaping. There is like the speed is legit impressive. I think for a guy's size especially, which I'm a big fan of guys that could get out on the open floor and really bring a kind of another level of uh, uh, kind of make your offense, your open floor offense, dynamic to another degree, and kind of push your pace to another level. And with that comes more efficiency, more kind of open floor and well spaced scoring and more efficient scoring opportunities for the general offense. Forcing opposing teams to kind of be weary of defending your transition offense and stuff like that. I think speed is very important, and mobility, like open floor mobility, is really important in today's NBA, college basketball as well, but especially NBA. And I think that's something that's a little bit underrated about him, his ability to kind of bring another, as I said, like level of transition offense. Get your overall team transition offense another degree higher. And I think that's what the not the only thing, but like one of the main things that really excites me about him as a prospect, and has kind of made me higher on him, is I watched more of him and kind of made me come around a little bit on him because I was definitely lowered in consensus on him prior to this. Excuse me. Um, Almost all of his biggest drawbacks kind of stem from his awkward posture and body composition, like really high shoulders, stiff back. Um, Struggles kind of getting low on both ends. He's a twitching, quick athlete, but very little fluidity, and it really makes it difficult for him to execute turns and kind of change directions abruptly. Limits his driving ability and creation upside to a decent degree, and kind of makes for some of his limitations as a shooter as well. On the defensive end, I think that's where a lot of people will talk about that offense. Excuse me, that the awkward posture and his kind of stiff hips and stuff. But I think he's maybe even a little bit underrated. I don't think he'll be a very good defender, but I don't think he's like horrible, and he'll probably be a little bit below average at 4 and certainly at the 5, but not someone that will get like run off the court consistently or anything like that. Maybe against like quicker guards, he may have some trouble containing pick and roll, and he isn't like the ideal piece in the switch scheme. I don't think he's extremely effective as a rim protector despite his vertical leaping, but he mostly executes his assignments and pretty good solid instincts like helping in gaps, being in correct position in their kind of pack line defense. Uh, Also at times is kind of able to take advantage of his twitchy explosiveness both vertically and horizontally to create plays in help situations or even on the ball. Maybe against like elite opponents, there may be some questions about his ability to keep up with the likes of shot makers like Harden and Curry that we hear so often about guys as kind of critique of certain prospects. Alternatively, in a few years, perhaps a prime Luka Doncic or Trey Young. And I understand some people will definitely bring that up, but that's not as huge of an issue in itself to me. I think basing your draft philosophy around an extremely hypothetical playoff series that may or may not happen in 5 years, where Toppin may or may not be a member of your team even by then, where you may or may not match up with the player in question, and the player may or may not live up to your expectations in both the positive and the negative manner. There are way too many ifs and buts for me to seriously place value into this argument. And, it is one I've heard mentioned, but a little bit skeptical about, basing your philosophy or like skipping on Toppin or another player that you think is the best prospect available just because of, kind of using this as the overriding factor into drafting or not drafting Toppin or any other prospect. But I understand it is all about winning championships at the end of the day, and to do that, you have to go through the elite players in the league. But yeah, just overall, I would caution about placing too much value on things, not just that particular thing, but just generally this level of thought where you're really zeroed in on a specific aspect of projection, where you're um, projecting in a very kind of overly detailed or overly minute way, and kind of uh, trying to really zero in on exact parameters of what a prospect will be in the future. Just there's so much doubt we have in projection and evaluating draft prospects and trying to understand how they'll translate in the future. So I think for now, I think at least unless we make some significant improvements in our understanding of prospect projection, I think it's best to be more kind of macro as opposed to micro in our projection, and kind of look at prospects more as a whole. I mean, obviously, I'm breaking down a prospect right now. That's what I'm doing at this moment. So, yeah, I'm not saying we should, just say, is he good or bad? 1-0, like binary or something. But, you know, um, saying that this particular small aspect of what you expect them to possibly be in several years is why you would or wouldn't draft somebody, I think is a misleading way of thinking, in a way that could have you making some poor choices in your draft evaluation. But yeah, going back more to Toppin, overall, as effective as he has been and as above the rim as he is able to play with the modicum of shooting and passing, it's not hard to see why some scouts love him. There's like a pretty high chance of hitting on him, and at least to some degree, picking Toppin won't lose you a job, especially in the right team in a draft like this. He's almost certain to live up to his expectations, at least to some degree. Yeah, as important as things like height and having good size is in the game of basketball. That's a very important aspect. So much of the game is about staying balanced and kind of being comfortably in control of your body and being able to create quick twitch, short space movements, and that's kind of all about getting your hips and just getting your body in general lower than your opponent. I think that's kind of an underrated aspect of the game of basketball. Is people talk about size all the time, but getting lower than guys is a huge uh, really effective way of beating your opponents and creating separation, and on the other end, denying separation on the defensive end. And this is something that Toppin is just not currently capable of. So someone has to basically create everything for him. He can finish plays the others develop at a very high level, but not really initiate plays himself with any reliability. So yeah, that kind of limits his upside to a pretty decent degree, and I think the way his game is set up and the way people still look at production like scoring and rebounding is a big part of the game when signing players to contracts and figuring out how much a guy is worth on the market and stuff like that. I think that kind of limits him as a prospect to some degree, and that's kind of what makes me lower to him more so than the particularly more hypothetical matchups that he may or may not come across in the future. So yeah, he isn't aesthetically a player I'd love, but I try not to let that seep into my evaluation too much. But at the same time, I do wonder how replaceable is a player like Toppin. Maybe not as much as I had thought in the past, and seeing the guys like Collins and even to some extent Clark. Even though I was pretty high on Clark, but even his success has been very impressive to me, and just generally guys that are capable kind of big man scorers and finisher. I think I've had underrated in the past to some degree. So seeing that has kind of made me maybe change my methods a little bit towards offensive big man, like a Toppin here. But still, at the end of the day, I'm not probably as high on this type of player as some around the NBA may be. And I understand, again, some of that has to do with job security and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts on Toppin. All right, let's do Desmond Bain. This is a test run. My daughter here. But since I could edit now, if she starts acting up, I could edit that out. um, so yeah, Desmond Bain, 67% spot up, 45% effective field goal percentage pull up. Both those numbers are very, very good, especially the spot up is one of the better numbers in the class. So obviously the shooting is the biggest draw. 0.4, 0.37 to be exact. Threes made off screen per 70 possessions. That's one of the higher numbers among all the prospects I'll be doing on these, or I plan to be doing in these videos. The mechanics aren't ideal. He kind of flicks it, but very functional. Able to get the shot off in incredibly versatile ways. Very good at getting up a good volume of them. Just one of the better shooters across the board, spotting up off the dribble off screen. One of the most impressive things about his shot is because he's so strong and he requires so little power outside just a little flick. He can kind of pump fake and be a little bit off balance in his lower body, but still have no problems getting the shot off with just mostly regular mechanics and his regular touch. Just doesn't strain himself. And the touch is truly excellent. Gets a lot of soft bounces despite that kind of flicky, quick release. And not having a very fluid kind of single motion windup. Still gets really soft bounces. And he really does love that pump fake and kind of side step combo to get his threes off. Can't stop on a dime, gather up with forward momentum. Uh, all arms, no lower body in his mechanics. His mechanics just all dependent on his arm, that little flick motion. The only thing that really matters as far as lower body is just to get his feet set, get his feet down, both feet down. And yeah, if you drop or if you go under in the screen, he's gonna drain them. Just some really ridiculous quick release shots, off movement as well. Really could be a big plus at the next level just from that perspective. Kind of adding value to the rest of his teammates, kind of raising the level of the rest of his teammates in offense, then just through providing spacing and forcing defenders, to play him on the outside and really give him a lot of attention because of the threat he provides as a three-point shooter, and just perimeter shooter in general. Uh, yeah, basically once he gets his feet set, he's golden. He's gonna knock it down automatic. Then the strength also comes out in his ability to execute skip passes. I've always thought he had some playmaking buried within his skill set, even in earlier seasons, because I remember him being a little bit of a combo guard in like high school AU games and highlights I had seen. But kind of the handle and the lack of a lead burst was holding him back. In previous seasons, he wasn't really able to create separation off the dribble and struggled putting it on the floor against pressure. But this year really improved his ball handling. Of course, still not incredibly advanced, but much better than it was in his first 3 seasons at TCU. And with how deadly his jump shooting is, especially now, it's continuing to improve, particularly off the dribbles. Off the dribble, excuse me. Teams are really forced to bring their big up and pick and roll and really go over the screen, and that's really allowed him to take advantage of his vision and ability to read the backside rotation and pick and roll. Really impressive skip passes and pick and rolls this year, and as the season progressed, he took on more and more of an initiator role for TCU and really had some dominant games between his shooting outbursts and his unselfish ability to set up teammates. He will actually show some decent burst, also, is like in a straight line. But the length standing reach really makes it difficult to finish over any sort of defensive rotation. Nothing special when it comes to vertical pop. And despite his 6'5" measurement, because of that lack of length, arm length, he's essentially like you know, compared to other relative to other like NBA prospect level guys, I would say he's like a 6'3", 6'4" type of guy. But it hasn't really been an issue for Tyler Hero at the next level, so we'll see. Some really impressive long range skips, kind of going against the momentum of his body at awkward body angles, kind of falling away. He's able to execute thanks to his strength again. Pretty good timing and touch in his lobs. Some of that may be taken away in the NBA. I mean, to be honest, a lot of that might be taken away, but it's still not useless as far as projection, and kind of a good thing to have to be able to execute that when he does attack closeouts or if he does need to run a pick and roll for whatever reason, and mostly just indicative of how unselfish he is and his ability to provide smart ball movement within the team context, understanding how to execute within a role. At times, he does kind of have to force passes because he's not a high upside scorer, especially at the next level. Doesn't have the handling craft. Doesn't have the length to finish, as I mentioned. Has some pretty good touch on runners, but that's not a shot you really want to depend on at the next level and build like a high usage profile around. Pretty predictable moves. Goes to the step back after dribble due to that inability to finish. Not really much. Change of direction ability, poor understanding of finishing craft or finding driving angles with timing and hesitation. You definitely need players like him to fill in the gaps offensively. His shooting should help maximize spacing and allow others in the team to benefit, as I mentioned. However, himself, he isn't a game changer unless he becomes an all-time shooter, which doesn't seem likely at this stage of his career. So yeah, I think that's kind of my take on his offense. I think he's definitely a very useful role player and could really help as far as like team building and having a guy who could shoot and pass to his level and you know, understands how to play within the team context and everything, but not a huge amount of upside on his own. As far as defensively, I think he's a bit underrated on ball against shooting guards and like non-elite, non-super athletic point guards. I think he's actually pretty fluid and capable of mirroring and taking away any easy driving lanes or ability to create separation, a lot of separation and stuff like that. Uses his strength well. Kind of bullies guys physically. lack of length is a bit of an issue, which probably keeps him from being as versatile as you'd like. Defending against like bigger wings and forwards, maybe he's not able to make some of the contests that you'd like. But overall, I definitely don't think he's a guy that's going to be hunted or anything. Pretty intelligent defensive player as well. Will take some possessions off mentally where he isn't fully engaged and isn't very like active trying to create. Plays or events on the defensive end, but also doesn't take too many gambles. So, he's okay defensively overall, probably a bit below an average. Solid enough positioning off ball, but we'll make some mistakes, miss some rotations here and there, and lack of attention a little bit too often. We'll lose his man. Caught ball watching. Alternatively, also not making help rotations on time, being in no man's land. So overall, probably a little bit below average defensively, but offensively, I'm fairly confident that, especially on already a successful team, he'll be a decently significant plus as a role player, a lower usage guy. One thing I'll say that gives me some hesitancy and a little bit of, makes me slightly lower and more concerned about him as a prospect is just the senior year bump, quote unquote. A lot of guys, once they reach, 22, 23, and it's particularly in their senior year when, they feel kind of the authority of experience and everything. And with the kind of a heliocentric TCU offense centered around him, likely had some kind of boost to his confidence and just mental approach due to the freedom he got. But on the other hand, he also, with the way TCU played this year, they took away a lot of the early transition runouts, which were such a big part of his game earlier in his career, and kind of allowed him to be such an efficient player. So that's kind of the other side of it. But still, overall, I am a little bit concerned that this season was kind of like a perfect place and a perfect kind of setup around him and situation and time, everything around him. Perfect moment in time, quote unquote, to kind of maximize his ability and show off him as a player to the utmost that he could possibly reach. And I'm not sure he'll be able to, considering the talent in the NBA, there will never be a situation where he'll be put in. He'll be put into a situation where he'll be as maximized to the same extent as a player overall. So yeah, that's a little bit of a concern. I hope that makes sense. Just the senior year bump, I kind of put it in more complex terms, but basically, I think most people have heard of this before. Just once you reach, a certain level of age and experience, you just have a physical and mental advantage over the guys you're playing against, and being in a offense that really gives you lots of freedom and kind of opportunity to be confident and do as you feel best without any worry for repercussions as far as being benched or getting the ball taken out of your hands in the future or something like that. It kind of allows you to play without any weight on your shoulders, quote unquote. So yeah, that's kind of I kind of just reiterated that just to explain it if it didn't make sense at first. So yeah, that's a little bit of a concern for him, but just with the success he's had this year, how realistic it is to straightforward project that. But yeah, overall, still a prospect I definitely like, and yeah, definitely somebody I'll have fairly high. I think NBA teams are kind of coming around on him, but still, I think overall I'll be higher than consensus on Bane. Um, I know a lot of people on draft Twitter like him though, so I think I'm fairly in line with most on draft Twitter on Bane. Um, yeah. All right, Reggie Perry. So he measured 6'8" without shoes at the NBA Combine last year. I think he may be even a little bit taller than that. 7'0", point 0.5, half an inch. Wingspan, that seems about right. 8'10" standing reach. Maybe a little bit longer, like I said, with the height. I feel like he might have grown like a half inch or so since then, but I don't know. It's just my feel for him, you know, watching basketball a lot and how he looks to me relative to other players. But I've definitely been wrong about heights and stuff like that before, so take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, even if he is at those NBA Combine measurements. I definitely think among guys that size, he's one of the better shooting prospects in the NCAA. We'll definitely have some really impressive shot making moments, like step backs, pick and pops, even like jump hooks and stuff like that, like so little flip shots, one handed closer and jump shots. Basically, as a big man, he comes about as close as you get to being able to score at all three levels. Unless you're like a elite big man shooting prospect. Once you get below those like elite level skilled bigs like Dirk or somebody like that, he's about as good as you get, as close as you get to like a three level scorer for somebody 6'8" without shoes, 8'10" standing reach. Um, 20.3 years old on July 1st. So the numbers I have is 50.5 effective field goal percentage, 2.3 spot up attempts, only 28%, I believe, on pull up jump shots, effective field goal percentage. But this is still fairly impressive overall when you look again relative to other players in his kind of archetype. But Jalen Smith is only at 47.5%, and Paul Reed 46.1%. This is on spot up no dribble jumper last 2 seasons combined, so it's a decent sized sample. And it's not just a tiny amount. So even though it's not a huge difference in shooting among them, the fact that Perry has a slight edge on the other two guys does make me somewhat more confident in shooting. And furthermore, he does have a better free throw percentage than Smith, and I think a pretty similar one to Reed in the last 2 years. With that being said, he's a really bad decision maker. Like really poor awareness of where defenders are. Like spatial awareness is lacking. Takes many bad shots. Will run into the paint when it's clogged up and just run a guy over for like a super obvious charge call. Tendency to expose the ball with the defender in clear view next to him, getting stripped. Tries to throw passes like right through defenders. So yeah, like his decision making and awareness, I would say, is the best way to describe it. At least in the offensive end, is really poor. He does have some vision and anticipation, and considering his archetype, he's a better passer than Jalen Smith or somebody like Precious Achiuwa or Daniel Aturu, for example. So at least when it comes to like vision and willingness to pass, if you look at his assist numbers purely, they're actually not that bad, and you do see some of flashes of setting up teammates, especially in early offense. Finding cutters out of the post, pretty good outlet passes, and he has some handling as well, especially in the open floor, kind of. Again, relative to some of those other guys, ability to take it, grab and go off the rebound is fairly decent, pretty good, I would say. But in the half court, very often out of control with the handle, and along with the questionable shot selection, it kind of makes it for a pretty problematic combo. It's impressive to have that pull-up capability, his size and age, and he can face up an attack to some degree, which is good. But at the same time, he definitely does it beyond his ability. Not good enough at it to use it as much as he does. Off the dribble, he could score against slower bigs, and NBA spacing should help this part of his game. He definitely already shows some ability to finish off the dribble, which you don't always see from guys his size. To have that coordination to go right up off the dribble and to finish on the move. But still not a guy I'd want handling the ball with any sort of consistency at the NBA level. Maybe putting it on the floor for a dribble or two, in a kind of low leverage situation. Okay, it's good to have that, but definitely not a guy who's, as I said, the pull up numbers are not good. Not a guy who I'd want going to pull up a lot, and just as far as him, making decisions and trying to attack the rim with multiple dribbles or trying to create against pressure with his awareness. There's definitely some issues that are likely to rise from that, especially against smarter and better defenders. And as I mentioned, really poor decisions against double teams, and will force a lot of really bad drives. Just does not recognize help coming over, um, and it leads to some really, really bad, out of control kind of turnovers, which really turns me off to him, despite having some of these. things that I talked about with Toppin, like I've kind of come around on this archetype, and I think when you look at just the vision and unselfishness, he's not, relative to the archetype again, he's not that bad. But the decision making awareness is just so bad. It's just I cannot picture how this guy could possibly be a successful NBA player. I hope I'm wrong. I'm not trying to like shit on Perry. I was really high on him on one point in high school. He showed some of that pull up skill. He kind of was a little bit smaller. I think he had like an inch or two growth spurt late in his high school career. But when he was a little bit smaller, he was a little bit more kind of coordinated and a little quicker. Uh, I wouldn't say quick, a little more fluid, I'll say, a little more like agile. And yeah, I kind of thought he may have some big wing upside, but despite growing and that helped him in certain ways, it kind of slowed him down and made him a little bit more awkward. And yeah, that really limited his game in a lot of ways, unfortunately. I feel like, at least from what I remember of his kind of high moments in high school. Perhaps I had just at that point had only watched some of his better games or something like that. Um, because it's not like when I was really high on him, I hadn't seen a huge amount of his games or anything like that. The one thing it did help him with definitely, or one of the things that helped him with his little growth spurt and his, increase in size has helped him with is just finishing at the rim. He does show some ability to explode vertically, especially just as far as like power. He doesn't jump super high and he's not like incredibly quick off his feet, but, he'll go up like strong and, he'll throw it down. Like he'll, kind of have a lot of velocity in this jump and a lot of, again, power. You'll see some really strong finishes kind of above the rim, pretty good rebounds as well at times. And as I mentioned, he runs the floor pretty well. So this kind of leads to him being able to catch lobs just decently well and finish pretty well in transition, along with, as I mentioned, the coordination to finish on the move off the dribble. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much length and misses a lot of the more kind of contested misses when he isn't able to just throw it down. I also wonder about his hands sometimes when it comes to like catching the ball. Seems to wobble and lose control of the ball at times, but I'm not 100% certain about that. Um, but yeah, like I am coming around this archetype, but the decision making is just too questionable. And not only that, I would maybe be willing to kind of forgive, and he's still relatively young, as I mentioned with age. I mean, he's 2 years younger than Toppin. Toppin 2 years ago perhaps would have some, maybe not to this extent with the awareness, but would have, I'm sure, his own issues. But my biggest concerns really come on defense, and the defense is just really bad as far as he can't change directions in space at all. Really poor body control, really poor understanding of like hip angles. As I mentioned, the feet are pretty heavy, just really awkward and kind of slow. And any crossover in space is just absolutely deadly to him. It seems like no chance to cut off penetration, like closing out on shooters is just. He's done pretty much if he has to, have any sort of abrupt closeout or, is faced with any abrupt change of direction or hesitation, change of speed. He's not as stiff as Toppin, but slower and I would say worse coordinated even than Toppin. And despite decent, well, that ability to kind of leap, um, you know, decent vertical leaping and jumping, he isn't that great protecting the rim when he doesn't have the load time to really take advantage of that or be already right in position to get his body in front of a guy. When he's able to get his body in front, he could be like all right, effective contesting just with his body and size. But a lot of the times, and maybe even most of the time, guards and kind of guys driving at him are kind of able to go around him with finishes with relative ease, just due to that lack of flexibility and twitch that he has, and also has pretty bad technique and footwork. Too jumpy, false or pump fakes a lot. And yeah, all of that on top of that positioning and awareness and help rotation. On top of that, he also has really bad positioning and awareness on help rotations also. So mostly just seems to be really lacking instincts for the game, feel for the game to the utmost degree. And I know I've heard some people talk about recently that you could improve feel, and for bigs, I've recently started to kind of allow for more room for them to possibly be able to overcome instinctual shortcomings, just through virtue of them playing a more limited role, particularly on the offensive end, and not having to rely on the decision making and awareness aspects and recognition aspects of it as much. On the defensive end, it's to a lesser extent, but I also feel like we have seen bigs kind of get more coordinated, at least, and kind of better at uh, utilizing their body, control of their body, and having better balance and stuff like that as they get older. As I mentioned, with the 2 inch growth spurt, that's not a huge amount, but still, as I said, it's kind of hindered his body control and coordination and all that. So perhaps with age, he kind of grows into his body and gets more comfortable with it and gets less awkward. So there's some, room for optimism. But overall, it's just really difficult to see a guy who has such bad feel for the game to, not be a negative at the next level as far as like his effect on court performance. I think the upside for him would be like somebody like and a Skenter type, like a realistic ceiling, quote unquote. Maybe with a little bit more shooting, but not quite as strong and fury around the rim. Not as good a rebounder, stuff like that. But with, as I said, a little more shooting upside, a little bit more perimeter skill. But just more so based on how Cantor's career has been from a more broad statistical perspective, being so productive as far as points and rebounds, and even being relatively efficient, but never being able to really make any positive impact towards his team's success, as far as on-off based metrics of any sort go, across the board. He's consistently been negative there, and I think that kind of lines up with my test, just because with how bad Cantor is defensively. But with Cantor also some of his passing and maybe offensive decision making isn't always ideal, and there's the more detailed and granular you get into comparing them, there become more, you see more and more differences. But just as far as that broad impact and statistical profile, kind of being productive in the box score stuff, but really struggling to have a positive impact on winning basketball games at the next level, is kind of what I see as like a ceiling outcome for Perry. So with that in mind, that really makes me not optimistic about drafting him. Maybe as a two-way guy, you could hope to kind of when you're still, while you're still especially like a bad team, you're not really contending, you can get him on the court maybe, and he'll put up a few nice games, of, I don't know, 14 points and 7 rebounds or something for you, and then you could kind of use him as a piece in a trade or something like that. I guess that would be my most uh, kind of optimistic outcome that I could, or like reasoning behind actually wanting to acquire him in the draft. But again, this wouldn't be more than likely within the top 60 picks for me. Like, I wouldn't draft him more than likely. So yeah, that's my opinion on Reggie Perry. All right, Robert Woodard, 6'7". I think he's listed like 230, 225, and probably close to like 7 foot wingspan. So that'll give him about a 8'8", maybe I'd say, standing reach. Um, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, definitely the body is like a big part of his appeal, just the physical build, and then he's just a really talented athlete at that size. Explosive, vertically quick off his feet, really covers distance, moves like a guard, very good motor. Plays hard, especially in the defensive end. Really flies around the court. Real defensive playmaker. I remember in the EYBL his year, he was the only guy with 15 steals and 15 blocks in the regular season. That season, with at least 15 steals and 15 blocks. Really instinctual defender. maybe not like a particularly high IQ one. Definitely makes his share of mistakes, but definitely tries to make things happen and puts himself into aggressive help position. Thanks to his ability to cover distance, he could help one pass away and kind of still recover to his own man, able to guard two guys at once to an extent. Um, Obviously has some tendency with that style to be overly aggressive, but I would rather see that than just a guy who uh, maybe makes a little bit less mistakes but doesn't bring that level of impact potentially. And doesn't play with that level of intensity and motor. At times we'll lose focus and get back cut or get caught ball watching out of control while closing out. At times gets too deep into the paint and then has to recover a long distance for out of the help rotation. And helping aggressively kind of leads to poor footwork on closeouts quite often and allows opponents to beat him off the dribble, or he gives up open spot ups if he kind of slows down and isn't as out of control on the closeouts, and misreads defensive situations as well at times, leads to being late on rotations at times. But the instincts, motor, and athletic ability are definitely there. The recognition and awareness are lacking, and the focus and engagement also a little bit, prone to shortcomings. Even like on ball, at times he'll give up some easy blow bys despite having the ability to stay in front of most guys, just with the lack of focus, as I said. But as far as like instincts and motor, for the most part, he's pretty good. Like mental engagement and focus is not always there, but physical, like he gives his full effort physically. Like he doesn't just stand around or anything like that. He'll, you know, um, try to make plays, put himself into positions to make plays and to make an impact on the defensive end. And I think that goes a really long way because over time, with experience, if he's able to find a way to stick around for long enough as he gets older, he'll figure things out. He'll figure out how to avoid some of those mistakes and how to, play with better technique and be more consistently engaged mentally and stuff like that. But, having that uh, approach to begin with to and the athleticism and physical talent to utilize that, that's the hard part, and he already shows that. So that's kind of definitely, I think, one of the most important things you could look at from prospects, particularly in the defensive end, is the physical talent, and then just their approach, just the very first thing that they kind of the attitude they come onto the court with, uh, which I kind of I think would call instinctual ability and feel for the game on both ends, but in particular defensively. And the fact that he has that, even despite all those shortcomings I mentioned, I think is a really good thing. Um, Despite having great size as a wing, is now like amazing as far as being like a difference maker, protecting the rim and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of an issue. I'm not sure how realistic it is to expect him to play the small ball five without giving up, significant amount of shots at the rim. He could like switch on bigger wings definitely, but in like maybe some power forwards, but not really going to be defending like NBA level like real fives and stuff like that. Um, on the offensive end, there's definitely some really impressive athletic finishes. Really powerful dunks over defenders, put back slams way above the rim at times. And the jump shot mechanics are pretty solid. Sometimes holds on to it a little bit too long. Still has the ball in his hands when it should be out already. Not necessarily like shooting on the way down, but maybe releases kind of like at the very pinpoint of his rise up, whereas he should be kind of releasing on the way up. And his 1-2 like step 1-2 step shooting is kind of awkward. Doesn't always get a good wrist snap. Poor timing and rhythm. Arms and legs not in a single fluid motion. He's much better off the hop, and you could kind of see that. And he's 55% on spot ups, effective field goal percentage last 2 years combined. But less than two attempts a game. Rarely takes those unless he's like really open. just 28% on pull-ups, also not a lot of attempts. But he did make 0.18 threes per 70 possessions off screen, which doesn't seem that amazing, but that's actually pretty solid at the college level. And, Mississippi State runs their share of plays off screen, so that's got something to do with that. But you could definitely see he's a lot more comfortable off the hop than off the catch. Mm, Overall, the opponents, because of his inability off the 1-2, kind of don't take him like a huge threat offensively. And I think in the NBA that'll be even more of an issue with the NBA 3-point line and everything. Even though with his strength, it seems like he shouldn't have a huge amount like pushing the shot to further range. But yeah, teams will definitely be able to help off him pretty aggressively, at least at this stage, unless he makes some pretty substantial improvements on the shooting. And so far, considering he's like a 60% free throw shooter in his 2 seasons, Mississippi State as well, that's definitely a pretty concerning sign. Now, we've seen guys in the past improve upon that or find ways to overcome it or whatever the case may be. Um, so, we'll see what happens. But definitely a pretty big concern and definitely like kind of the big downfall for him as a prospect is the shooting and, how much impact could he make if he can't hit shots. It's definitely a question. Will likely cram spacing. Maybe playing him at the four could help. And I think that's probably going to be the way to use him, at least in the start of his career, kind of as a mismatch against like taller shooters like Markkinen or somebody like that. If the team puts in Markkinen and you have like a more traditional foreman out there, and Markkinen is really giving him trouble by pulling him out to the 3-point line and stuff like that, and forcing them to guard on the perimeter, and you're kind of having trouble dealing with that. I think Woodard is definitely a very good option to guard pick and pops and stuff like that against a guy like Markkinen, who, even though he's taller than Woodard, is not going to really like take him in the post and abuse him inside or anything like that. He's taller, he has some post game, but it's not going to be like a huge issue where Woodard is going to get destroyed in the post or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of to counteract guys like that. I think he could be a useful option off the bench, especially if he could hit a three or two while he's on the floor, which we'll see if how realistic that is to expect. But uh, otherwise, he shows some flashes of passing ability. Coming off a curl again. If he gets his man in the back and the big man defender comes up, he could. Drop it off to the dunker spot. He's not like a selfish player or anything. And thanks to his athletic talent, he also has like some flashes of splitting defenders. Pretty impressive body control, fluidity. Balance is good. So his handle is pretty high and loose. Will lose control, get stripped when trying to create. Uh, Especially against more like competent, quicker defenders. But just with his athletic ability, he's still able to make some pretty impressive plays. Uh, at times, flashes of impressive plays. I'll say that. Decision making is somewhat raw. Will misread situations, pick up the dribble thoroughly. Pretty slow recognizing and kind of assessing the situation on the court and kind of making a quick snap decision, and especially a good high level decisions, stuff like that is a bit of an issue. So definitely not going to be a very high end offensive guy. Besides just like athletic plays like runouts and maybe some putbacks or stuff like that, cuts. So the shooting is definitely going to be big for him. He could use his body to power through players. Pretty impressive lift when he gets ahead of steam, especially. He could finish up and around help and stuff. Pretty good hang time. Just a great athlete with excellent body. Could defend 2 through 4 pretty much. But the raw perimeter skills and kind of mental lapses really limit his upside overall. And unless he really makes rapid improvements on his shot, I kind of have some doubts about him. But at the same time, I will say with that kind of athletic talent, at some point he's definitely worth looking at. So that's pretty much it for this episode. But I'll go real quick through So we've done most of the mid-major teams now in college basketball. I haven't really done any international guys yet. I'm starting to do my notes for the international guys and like start making some of these scouting reports for the international guys a little bit more. So in a few episodes, hopefully we'll get some international guys done. But for now, I've just been doing the college guys. We've mostly, like I said, next few weeks I'll have a few more international mid-major guys to finish up the mid majors. So I'm not gonna like read off every single D1 team, but as far as high major, like the major six conferences, the teams that we're done with are in alphabetical order: Arizona State, Boston College, Butler, California, Florida, Georgetown, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Illinois, Iowa State, Kansas State, Miami, Florida, Mississippi, Mississippi State, Missouri, North Carolina State, Nebraska, Northwestern, Notre Dame, Oregon, Pittsburgh, Providence, Purdue, Rutgers, Texas Christian, Texas, Texas A&M, UCLA, USC, Utah, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. So all of those teams, the overwhelming majority of them just didn't have any really relevant prospects for this 2020 class. A few of them had guys that we just already went over, like Michigan State. I did the three guys, or like Illinois. I felt like Dosunmu was a prospect, so I talked about him. Kofi Cockburn, not so much, for example. A few of these teams like that. And now that we just did this, Mississippi State is now off the list, for example, or TCU, which is the Bane. Um, Out of all those teams, the two guys I would mention really fast is Xavier Sneed, who kind of had a down season with Kansas State, kind of not having the talent around him that they had in the last few years prior, with Dean Wade and Barry Brown gone. But as a star, he kind of had some struggles. But I think he could still be somewhat interesting as a possible 3 and D guy off the bench. I wish he's definitely, you could say this for pretty much anyone, you wish they were 2 inches taller. But yeah, I wish he was 2 inches taller because that would definitely, make his game make a lot more sense. But, still might be worth a look, at least like in Summer League or something for sure. And then at Notre Dame, Juwan Durham, I think definitely to some extent I've moved off, and I think it's the smart thing to do is not really look at centers or like non-shooting big man outside like the elite class of guys like an Okongwu or somebody like that. Once you get into the end of the first and the second round, you shouldn't really be looking too much into at too many bigs. There's going to be some probably on my list, like a Vernon Carey or something, but I'm considerably lower on most of those guys, as say Stewart, and so forth, than the consensus is. So yeah, if they dropped, a very substantial amount from where their consensus rank is currently, sure, yeah, at some point I'd take one of those guys. But yeah, for the most part, you shouldn't really, in my opinion, at least my philosophy is not to really pick up most of those guys. But there is a limit, and at some point, some of those guys may be worth a look. Like if you're really like lower on the list, like some of these fringy guys like Xavier Sneed that you're looking at as like summer league guys to just throw on your G League roster to see what happens. And yeah, Durham is kind of like that. Who knows? Maybe he ends up the next Dwayne Dedman. He could block shots. He's long, and he has decentish touch for a guy like that and that kind of archetype. So maybe he figures out how to hit open threes here and there and block some shots for you off the bench, and you could bring him over from summer league, and he could competently fill in like a third string five role for you or whatever. So yeah, I thought I mentioned those two guys among all those teams. Yeah, and just to rank these guys now. I'll start with Toppin. I put him fourth, right under Edwards. I'll say it's pretty close with all three of these guys. Haliburton at number two, Edwards number three, and Toppin at four. And I do think I'm fairly comfortable putting Toppin above Tyrese Maxey, who's number five right now. But what was I going to say? Yeah, the problem with Toppin is just, yeah, he's a pretty safe pick, and I think he'll be fairly easy to like find a way to fit him within various roster constructs as far as like on court, and I think there's a decent likelihood that he'll have maybe not a huge positive impact. I don't think he has a huge upside, as I said, but I think he could be effective and make some uh, amount of impact that's not like irrelevant. On the lower side, maybe like a Larry Nance, and then on the higher side, like John Collins is a common comparison you'll hear. But the problem with a guy like that, if it's Nance, it's not somebody that actually does make a very relevant impact towards actually contending or anything like that. But and if it is Collins, it's again it's probably irrelevant to some degree. It's more than like zero. It's probably like a +1 or something like that. But guys like that, because they put on the production in the most kind of relevant and most bold, and the two categories, points and rebounds, that everybody looks at and everybody knows, and are kind of the two headliners among box score stats, so to say. Those guys usually demand a salary that's larger than or at the very least equal to their on-court impact. Whereas if you're building a championship contender, and especially a team that's likely going to win the championship, a favorite for the championship, you got to have as many guys as possible that are, you're paying below what their market value should be. And I think that's unlikely that if Toppin reaches a high end outcome, that he'll be getting paid less than market value, especially with how athletic he is too. I'm sure he'll find his way into highlights and stuff like that. Blake Griffin, another one that's like ceiling outcome for Toppin, and even then, I mean, if Toppin is Blake Griffin, he should definitely be way higher than number 4. But nevertheless, that's a guy that's, is he really worth the max? Maybe like in his prime, he probably was worth the max, but he was like, barely above the max. Whereas most max guys, that's where you really get a lot of value, like the top max guys. So yeah, do you want a guy that's just right above, his actual value is right above the max, or do you want to use your max on a guy who's like way 3 times as good as what the max is? So yeah, that's kind of my issue with Toppin there. That's why I'm not higher, even though I think maybe in the vacuum he might even pass Edwards and Haliburton. Um, Especially if you're looking at a more median outcome. Then next is Desmond Bain. It's difficult with Maxey and Bain. I really like Bain. I'm fairly like confident that he'll be a useful role player. He definitely makes me think of Terrence Davis last year and how I should have had Davis higher. For now, I'll still put him slightly below Maxey because I just don't see Bain really having much upside. But talk about guys that I think have a are very safe to, I think, at least be a useful role player, and I think he could be even like a legit impact role player with the right situation and a right context around him for the right team. Um, and unlike Toppin, he could be like a +2 guy, but be low usage enough, to allow your stars to do their thing and bring their level of impact, but at the same time not demand a huge salary or anything like that on the open market, and just kind of more bring value through his ball movement and solid, if not game changing defense, and of course mainly just the spacing and shooting that he provides as a kind of a two guard slash wing or whatever. And then the other two guys, Reggie Perry and Robert Woodard, are more down on the list at number 13 and 14, right between Chris Smith and Ayo Dosunmu. I'll post the whole board in the description of the video. Um, yeah, I just think Smith, if you look at him and Woodard in comparison, they're basically the same age. Smith is actually a little bit younger, despite being a year older, quote unquote, in the class. Like Smith is a junior, rising senior, and Woodard is a sophomore, rising junior. So, but Smith is actually a few months, I think, younger than Woodard, basically same age. And Smith is a little bit taller, a little bit more dependable shooter. Woodard is definitely more like explosive and bouncy, so you could say there's a little bit more physical upside there, but there's just so many questions, and the likelihood of Woodard actually being skilled enough offensively to be able to stay on the floor in the NBA. Doesn't seem too likely to me. And even if he does come around as just shooter, I don't know if the upside is that high or that much higher than Smith is. That the significant downsides really outweigh it. And Smith is a 6'9" guy who could legitimately play wing, but has the height to play the four. I think is a little bit more trustworthy because of that height and length, and some extent, playing the four than Woodard. Because Woodard, despite his athleticism and stuff like that, I mentioned some of the questions with him playing the four. He's still not a uh, much of a rim protector. I think Smith has a little bit better shot blocking instincts. Even if okay, I shouldn't say, because Woodard is better shot blocking as far as like chase down blocks or like coming from like weak side and making like an athletic play type of blocks. But as far as being the one of the primary rim protectors waiting for you in the paint, I think Smith is better just because of his size. But I don't know. It's probably close, but yeah, just overall, I'm a little bit. I trust Smith more, and I just think Woodard has a lot of downside, and I don't really think the upside is that high, even if it somehow hits in that tiny chance. And then 14, I have Reggie Perry. I think maybe I should be even lower on Perry. I'm really not that big of a fan, as I talked about with him, but there's so many guards in this class, and at some points you just need, some teams just need forwards, and if you're, making these boards, at least the way I make the board is kind of taking in the totality of the needs of all teams kind of combined, like averaging them out, quote unquote. Uh, Obviously I don't literally do that, but like I do the best, my best to estimate that in my head. Some teams are going to need forwards, basically, the point is. And, Perry is one of the few guys who has that size and shooting and stuff like that. So even though I think, again, like Woodard, there's a pretty high likelihood he's not ever, a prolonged NBA player due to his decision making and awareness and stuff. But at least he has size and he could shoot some. He could rebound, block shots a little bit, which is more than you could say for a lot of these guys that are just smaller or are just don't have that type of skill set. If they do have Perry's size. So yeah, that's my opinion. So right now for these guys, even looking at something, maybe I should just move Perry lower. But the guards I have below him right now, I'll say that even though Woodard and Perry are just one spot apart right now, I think that there's a bigger gap there than you may realize, than it seems by just them being only one spot apart. Sorry. Um, but yeah, that's about it. Thank you for tuning in. See you next video later.